Shalom, this is Avraham Shira. Welcome to our erev Shabbat talk. We're here in Eretz Israel and we've got about an hour or so. And I wanted to share some thoughts and ideas from the greatest Kabbalist of the modern era, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, and his student Rabbi Chaim Vital, about some very esoteric ideas that are actually very grounded in this world. And I think that it's part of the job of the modern metaphysics is to demystify the mystical. When we want to understand something of a very high spiritual nature, we oftentimes give metaphors to understand the spiritual thing from like a person would take a handle to a cup in order to be able to hold the cup. But what happens is in the mind, we start to look at spirituality and physicality as two different things, but it's not really that way. That the general principle that we always have to remember is that spiritual must have something physical to ride upon to be in this world. And so we're going to talk about angels and garments and names in association with Shabbat, because in Shabbat there are special garments that we wear, there are special prayers that we say that have special names, with special intentions that we have connected to Shabbat, and of course there are other customs that we have, like going to the mikveh before Shabbat, lighting the candles, of course, is a mitzvah, but we also make blessings over pleasant fragrances. All of these things are invoking spiritual power into the physical realm. They're there in potential, but something in potential is not in the actual. And our job as human beings is to unite the physical and the spiritual through our activities. So, for example, the Rav tells us that we should wash our hands, our face, and our feet with hot water before Shabbat. Now, why the hands, face, and feet? Dafka. Well, when we understand a little bit more in Kabbalah, we understand that your soul emanates from your hands, your face, and your feet, because these are the extremities from which the soul emanates. Now, for example, the backside of your head, behind your neck, your shoulder blades, etc., that's considered the opposite side, the place where the light does not emanate. Because the soul is coming from deep within a person and moving outward. From the heart and the mind, moving outward through the eyes, through the mouth, through the hands, and through the feet. And so when the rabbi tells us to wash our hands, face, and feet before Shabbat, well, we just go take a shower. But back in the day, we have to understand how precious hot water was. And if you could just get your hands, your face, and your feet washed, you were happy. But those areas, the hands, face, and feet, are where negative forces gather. And the idea of Shabbat is we want to enter a new level of soul. And so we want to wash those areas, those physical areas, in order to remove negative forces that might have gathered there. This is why we wash the hands when we wake up in the morning. This is why they used to wash the feet when they entered the Beit HaMikdash. And some old gentlemen still do it today in Jerusalem, I've seen it. And of course we wash our face. Because the place where the light emanates is exactly the place where the negative forces gather. That's a statement that's worth repeating. The place where the light of your soul emanates is where the negative forces want to gather. When you smile, you're emanating good energy, holy energy, energy that is infectious and good for other people. So the other side doesn't want you to be a good influence on the world. The other side wants you to be depressed and down and out. Now that's a little simple because, of course, the other side really wants us to defeat him. And the angels of destruction and the negative forces are actually here for us to defeat. And the chief way we defeat them is not by taking them on in battle like Esav, the angel of Esav and Jacob did in a couple of parshas from now. But rather, the main war against the negative forces is just by increasing the light. When we increase the light, they automatically fall away. So when we use the simplest thing of washing your hands and face and feet before Shabbat with hot water, you have intention to remove the negative forces. And this has nothing to do with dirt or sweat, etc., or does it? Well, the truth is, in the Kabbalah, there are certain negative forces that can even attach themselves to dirt, to garbage, to things like that. And so we don't want those attached to us. The same is true of our clothes. When your clothes have a stain, it's just a stain, right? You spilled your coffee on your shirt. Now what? No, but that stain is a symbol of an inroad made by a negative force over a person's consciousness. What do I mean? Why did I spill the coffee on my shirt? Because I wasn't paying attention. Because I was in a hurry. Because I was anxious. Because I was nervous. All those are negative spiritual forces. Now, we don't call them that because it's not a modern way of relating to reality. But they are. If you're anxious, that's a form of fear, anxiety. And that causes a disconnection between my mind, my heart, and my hand. And that disconnection gets expressed by spilling the coffee onto my shirt. And so then I look at my shirt and I see a stain. That stain is the sign of the disconnection already in place within. And so on Shabbat, what do? We say, no, let's get a clean shirt. That's a good idea. Why not? Feel nice. Don't you feel good when you put on clean clothes? Now, most people are not used to thinking this way, and it's difficult for some people to think this way. But you see that the mystical is actually very practical and very grounded and very logical if we understand the components and how they work. Now, the washing of the hands, face, and feet, and the washing of our garments for Shabbat, those are two levels. The next level, though, that the Rav brings to us is the intention that you have when you put on your Shabbos clothes. That your Shabbos clothes are considered special and you're only supposed to wear them during the week, during the Shabbat. Excuse me. Now, there's 3 different angels, actually, that are associated with your Shabbos clothes. The inner garment, the middle garment, and the outer garment. Now, wait, this is getting complicated. Wait a minute. Well, all of us wear inner and middle and outer garments, especially in the wintertime. But what does it mean that each level of garments has an angel connected to it? Well, what is an angel? Well, the word for angel in Hebrew is malach. And that name, malach, angel, also is used to name sailors that sail the wide ocean blue. Now why? What's the connection? Because sailors take things from one port to another. They get on a ship, they sail the ship across the sea, they deliver the goods, the merchandise that's on the ship, they take off. That is essentially what an angel does. It emanates from Hashem with the merchandise of heaven and delivers it to a port, which hopefully will be our consciousness. And so the idea is simply an energy information transfer system. Now, as we're speaking, we're doing that. I'm emanating energy from my mouth and from my eyes and my body, etc. It's going into this camera, and it's coming out into your camera. Isn't that a system of energy transference? Okay, well, we know that 100 years ago, Tesla described how it was going to happen. And then it did happen finally in the 80s and 90s until now, where we have, phones that can do almost everything. But the principle is the same. The transfer of information. But why it's important to us? Because we want the information from the high holy place, from the heart and the mind of the Creator. And I prefer not to get the information from the impure places. So, there's a name for the outer garments. And the name is corresponding to Zohar, and Shem Aleph Lamed El. And that name literally means the shining of God. And then the next level of garments, the top level is Katar El, right? The name Keter, the crown of the Almighty. And then when you put on your shoes, there's even an angel. And I'm not going to say the name out loud, but it's not so complicated. It's just 4 syllables. But Yud Vav Tzadik Fei Chet Yud Resh Vav Nun. Okay, I'm sure if anybody really wants to learn and practice at this level of observance of the Kabbalah and Judaism, they can buy the Siddur and any bookstore in Jerusalem and practice. But my purpose here is to explain, to bring the idea down to an understandable way that it becomes logical and understandable. And we demystify the mystical. And that brings heaven and earth together. So these names, when you're thinking of a name of an angel, what are you thinking about? You're thinking about a string of sounds. What is a string of sounds? A string of sounds is a code of vibrations or frequencies of sound. So that when you say God's name in prayers, etc., you're emoting a series of sounds in a very specific order that carries a vibration. And so these names for this particular aspect of getting ready for Shabbat, putting on your Shabbos clothes, the Rav tells us that we should have intention that these angels are God's garments. Just like you get dressed for Shabbat, God gets dressed for Shabbat. But He doesn't have a body, right? God doesn't need to put on physical clothes. But when you're infinite, you've got to wear something, right? How else can you appear in the world? How else can you transmit your intentions to the world? You can't go give the Gettysburg Address, the great speeches of the world, not dressed. So God also has garments, and His names are His garments. And think about it for a second. I see here Rivka Rose Tuminelli. Hi, Rivka Rose. And I'm sure some of you other folks are out there. I've seen your names, and maybe we've learned together before. But whatever your name is, Rivka Rose, that's your name. Take away your name for a second. You're no longer Rivka Rose. I've just stripped away your identity. I just took off a garment of your soul. Your name is a garment of your soul. And without a name, you suddenly are homeless in the universe. In a way. Now, an extreme case of this is when a person gets amnesia, which can be a very horrible thing, where a person gets a knock on the head or whatever, and they can't remember who they are. They don't know where to go home. They don't remember their name or their spouse or where they live. Can you imagine? So your name is a garment of your soul. And these names are garments of God. And we need the name because it gives us an anchor in a world that is infinite. It's an infinite sea. Now, without an anchor, the ship is going to be lost. Okay. Now, there's a whole series of meditations that we do when we go to the mikveh. We should merit. Some people, they don't have access to a mikveh. Even taking a shower with intention, where 9 kab of water, which is about 4.5 shoe boxes of water, give or take, depends on your size of your shoes. That's how the rabbis measure things according to the ancient means of measurement, according to everyday life. So a kab is literally about a shoebox worth of seed that would be used to plant a field of 5 by 5 meters. A small field in your backyard, right? You need a certain amount of seed that is the proper amount to plant wheat, for example. So that was called a kab worth of seed. So they use that measurement to measure the water of a mikveh. And it's this way with all biblical measurements. It's rooted in the everyday life of the people, which is really fascinating when you look at it. Because you see how the rabbis gave measurements for things that would last forever. Because there was a time in the world when we didn't have feet and inches and yards and meters and centimeters. There was a time where there were no clocks. There was a time when there were no yardsticks. There were no light meters. There were no cameras. Can you imagine? It's hard to imagine life without a phone, right? Without a smartphone. Anyways. So this measure of water, actually, if you have intention while you're taking a shower, erev Shabbat, to remove those negative forces of the weekday. Now, we're going to go through a few of the ideas. It's very simple, really. But it's so important and it's so helpful that when you go into the mikveh, the first intention is that you want to remove all negative forces. That means, like if you touch something that was dead, for example, or if you touched something that was bleeding, for example. Anytime, what is tuma? Tuma is the absence of life. Okay, so when something dies, it's the residue of life. And that's what we call impure. So blood, a dead body, a bone, for example, rotted meat, anything that was once alive and then becomes dead carries a certain amount of impurity. Okay, so just think of it in terms of life and death. But don't get too, don't hide behind the curtains. It's not that dramatic. It just means that there are forces in the universe that God uses to balance creation, life, the desire to live, and death, the absence of life. So that's what we call impurity. Okay. So that's the first intention, that the weekday is like that part of the day that's the part of the time that's not attached to the infinite emanation the way Shabbat is. So on Shabbat, for example, we're connecting to the first Shabbat that ever was in creation. And it's this day that keeps spinning through time and weaving itself through our lives and through the lives of all people from the beginning of Shabbat. Which, of course, the first Shabbat commanded was after we received the Torah at Mount Sinai. But still, the concept of Shabbat existed before Mount Sinai. So it's a place in time that's above time, and it keeps weaving through time. That's Shabbat. A place in time, but it itself is above time. It's like that thread of gold through the fabric that you constantly see. Okay? Now what happens is, on Shabbat, we're taking on a piece of that infinity in the midst of our finite existence. So when we go to the mikveh, for example, we want to get rid of that impurity, that negative life force, the absence of the life force that we have every time you go to sleep. You're actually removing your higher soul, and what remains behind is a very limited life force. Okay, now another thing that we have intention on the mikveh of Shabbat is to remove anger, because anger is the same thing as death. It's a cutoff from the life force. And so we want to have intention. I'm getting rid of all my anger. I don't care whoever I've been angry at, whether it's big or small, whether it's a long time coming or it's just something that happened recently. I want to remove all anger, because anger is connected to the not life force. Okay? Now, what else? Well, there's a thing the Rav here describes. Rabbi Chaim writes that there is a ruach of the weekday. There's a spirit of the weekday that we want to wash off erev Shabbat. What's the spirit of the weekday? Think about it. It's usually, for me, I see it in myself and in others, is this power, this desire to acquire. The desire to acquire. I want to acquire money, I want to acquire food, I want to acquire honor, I want to acquire fame, whatever it is that you're after. It's this desire to receive. And on Shabbat, we don't have to have the desire to receive. Which is the great paradox of Shabbat, is I don't have to have the desire to receive it. It's coming anyways. All I have to do is keep the basic laws of Shabbat, and the light comes into my soul. I don't have to desire it. So the spirit of the weekday is that energy you see on people's faces when they go shopping. They got to get this thing. You know, this Black Friday thing is insanity to me. I don't know about all of you. Maybe I'm missing out on all those deals. You know, first you have to have the money to buy the thing at half price also, right? It doesn't. You don't lose anything by staying home. But the whole idea of Black Friday, it's craziness, right? It's just this, it's a magnifying the force of there's another word for it. I'm going to let it go for now. It's a little severe. But acquiring things is one of the things that we have to do in this life. But it's not about Shabbat. That's why we don't buy anything on Shabbat. That's why we don't even handle money. That's why I don't make phone calls. One of the reasons why I don't make phone calls is because I'm not trying to get anything. What a relief. There's actually a day where I don't have to go out and get things. I can just receive. I can receive the Shabbat. I can receive the peace. I can receive the pleasantness. You see people's faces change instantly on Shabbat. Especially when you live with other, with religious people that are keeping Shabbat at whatever level. And then you can relax and you go to synagogue, you can pray all the book, you can pray half the book, whatever you need, whatever you're holding, because everybody's in a different place on this ladder, on this escalator. Right? And then you receive the songs of Shabbat. The angels of Shabbat are actually, the Rav describes elsewhere in the Kabbalah, that when we go home and we say Shalom Aleichem, we sing this song to the angels, we're singing a song to our own higher soul, which is compared to an angel, and to the negative fellow that hangs around all the time behind the left side of your brain, called the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. He is subdued on Shabbat. So he has to come take place. He has to come see the holiness of Shabbat and see you lost again. That's what we're telling the evil inclination. So he's forced to be there for that singing. Because in the root, really, what we call the evil inclination, his root is actually a high holy angel as well. But that's a Shira unto itself. We're going to talk about that another time. The real understanding of what evil is and how it operates. Why we seem to lose to him all the time and why we're ultimately destined to defeat him. But regardless, that's part of the receiving. We receive those angels, and of course we receive the wine for the Kiddush. We sanctify the day over wine because wine is this substance that elevates the soul a little bit as well. Then we make a blessing over bread. Again, we're receiving. The whole day is designed for this. And so when people are totally uptight about getting stuff, it's very hard to turn that motor off. And that's why people sit around on Shabbat like, what do I do? What do I do? What do you mean, what do you do? How about just not doing? How about just sitting down? Can you sit and be quiet for 5 minutes? Now, in our generation, it's pretty tough. I imagine back in the day, you know, life was a little slower paced. And we weren't so accustomed to acquiring all the time. Because even when you turn on YouTube or you watch TV, you're acquiring information. And so I don't want to acquire the YouTube information and the TV information on Shabbat. I want to acquire a deeper, holier, purer information that's coming from the Shabbat soul. So all of this is just attached with the intentions of going to the mikveh, because we're stripping away the weekday. And it doesn't matter if you're a Kabbalist or you're a newbie who's just checking out Judaism. You have these ideas. You go in the water and you think, I'm getting rid of my anger. I'm getting rid of my desire to acquire. I'm getting rid of anything that's negative, which might mean also, you know, I need to, you know, shower with some soap. You know, when you go to yeshiva, you'll know what I mean, right? These young guys, they're so attached to the Torah, they forget that they need to use soap. What can I tell you? Hi. There's a lot can be said about every word of Torah, even the word for sweat. You know, is part of the curse of Adam. And the sweat of your brow, you will eat bread. Now, it doesn't really sound very interesting, you know, to sweat. I'm going to eat and sweat while I'm eating bread. Of course, it doesn't really mean that. It means you're going to work hard to produce bread. And bread, good bread, the way bread used to be, right? Before wheat got stripped of everything good and became a poison, good bread was, this of course, kept people alive for long times. And it kept people satisfied for many hours at a time. And so it was necessary. Now, when we have challah on Shabbat, we really need to be thinking about the way bread used to be. Because it had a much different power over us than what we have today. Now, of course, you can get organic bread and you can get whole wheat and whole grains. It's all better. There are many levels. But the point is again, we're receiving, because Shabbat receives from all the weekdays. And we bring that home. And just like a king, the king, he receives from his kingdom. And then he gives back out to the world. And so too, we receive from the Shabbat. We receive our holy soul, our true selves, our higher selves. And then we have something to work with to start it over again on Saturday night. Well, usually Saturday night, we like to stretch the Shabbat as long as we can. So I can't really stretch much longer here. I see the sun is shining in the trees. God bless all of you. Have a great Shabbat. If we can just take a little bit of time for these very high but very practical applications of the mitzvot. The mikveh, washing, having clean clothes, having the idea that we are taking on new garments, removing old garments. That's why oftentimes when you get closer to Hashem, you want to change your name, because your name is a garment of your higher soul. So we'll talk more about it. Check us out on YouTube, on our Patreon platform. I do name interpretations for people, and there's some advertising out there about that, and you can see some samples. Because when you discover who your name is, you'll really find out your address in this universe. God bless all of you. Shabbat Shalom.